Hi folks, welcome to my channel, or welcome back. My name is Kat. I'm a licensed registered dietitian nutritionist, and on this channel we like to talk about weight inclusive and weight neutral focused approaches to health, as well as diving into scammy and, in my opinion, unethical nutrition related businesses, products, mostly nutrition related MLMs, and other fear mongering nutrition related claims. Now in today's video, I'm trying to incorporate more of an action plan to support the movement from traditional dieting, traditional approaches that I think really harm one's relationship with food and are very much focused on this like diet centric approach, and help people to get tools moving them to a more weight neutral, food neutral approach where we can really work on actions that are sustainable and that help support their physical health while not harming those other aspects of health like mental, social, and emotional well-being. So I'm incorporating those more into my channel because I think that it is important to not just talk about the role or that the idea that I support those kind of things, but also giving more tools about that. I don't think I'll ever stop talking about nutrition related MLMs because I find them fascinating and so harmful. And until they're completely gone, I will continue to talk about the misinformation that comes from them a lot of the times, and outside of MLM as well. So today we're really focusing on just kind of having a conversation. I mean, a one-sided conversation. I guess it's not a conversation, but I want to have more conversation around the idea of the transition from this very diety approach to improved health, moving from there to a more healthy relationship with food. That transition period is a very challenging time for most people anyway. And with that challenging time, there comes a lot of nuance. And I think so often, especially on social media, moving from it or in that direction, it can feel very combative sometimes. And it's very much kind of like an all or nothing kind of thing. Like you're either dieting or you're absolutely not. And that can make people moving from one to the other side really kind of scary, and it kind of can be off-putting for many. In a similar way, we can see that experience in multi-level marketing. So a lot of times when people are moving from multi-level marketing, like being a distributor and being like all about that company, to recognizing some of the harms and some of the issues around multi-level marketing, the business structure, they might kind of want to see themselves move in that direction outside to a more anti-MLM approach or viewpoint. But if they see this kind of stance that is like you have to be all or nothing kind of thing when you're transitioning out, that can be really scary, and that can actually push someone further into their company being a distributor for that company. Sorry if there's like a cat hair. There was a cat hair that was just like flying around. But the transition for many people from inside an MLM company to outside, for many people, including myself, it was a very, very long process. There was a lot of small little steps moving out. First, it was not inviting people for the opportunity business-wise, and then it was not inviting people to learn about the product, and then it was like not attending as many in-person events, and then not attending as many online events, and then finally at the end not purchasing that product, right? And so it was a long process. It's small little steps. And so a lot of people who I work with have been through many diets, many diets, some of them MLM related or not. Either way, there is a process kind of moving from the kind of overall approach of having very strict, very like regimented diet approach to not having that. And it can be really scary to have this idea that you're just gonna not follow a diet. And there's a lot of like different skills within that, and learning how to listen to your body and all of this stuff. So my goal with this is really to break that down a little bit further and talk about those nuances a little bit, because overall it is not an all or nothing kind of thing. Food itself, it's not a black or white kind of thing. Moving from traditional dieting to that also is not a black or white thing, all or nothing kind of thing. And so I think the more that we can kind of peel back the layers of all or nothing mindsets, typically that's going to be helpful for behavior change and overall just compassion, like for others and then also for self. So with all that being said, if that sounds good to you, let's go. All right, so as a side note, I am very excited about being able to wear a sweater. It is finally getting cooler where I live, and so if you see me like playing with the sleeves, I'm sorry about that. I'm gonna try not to do that so much, but I love being in cozy sweaters, and so it just might happen. So before we dive deeper, let's just kind of get more of a foundation of what we're talking about. So with traditional dieting, we see things like calorie counting or any kind of like rigid plan that you are following to a T as far as like that's the goal. And so that itself is even a nuance kind of thing. Like for some people, they really enjoy having a macro focus. For some people, they really do not. And so if somebody does have this really good experience with macro counting, typically it's going to be like a shorter amount of time. It's not going to be for a long amount of time. So like athletes, for example, sometimes they will go, especially like in the weightlifting. I am a sports dietitian, so I work with a lot of athletes, majority of them being weightlifters, Olympic lifters, and the similar. So oftentimes when they'll get done with their seasonal competitions, they'll focus in on like a gaining period where they're really focused on gaining muscle. And with that, they want to make sure most of the time they're doing a lot of physical activity, and so they already have an increased need for food. And so sometimes having those macros can help them to make sure that they're eating enough. And so during that period of time, they might do that massing. And so I just wanted to make that note because I am a really big advocate when it comes to nutrition and health. There is a lot of nuance, and it's really, I think, can be harmful if there is this kind of like dichotomous thinking that something is like good or not. Most of the time there'll be a plan focused around like meeting all of these rules, and that often we see leading to guilt or shame around specific food choices, or this kind of like binge eating cycle, this pendulum swing of restriction. And then once something happens or they let go for the day or whatever, it can kind of lead to this consumption where it might be more than what they would normally do if they didn't have that restriction in the first place, right? So it's very regimented, and it doesn't really take into account so much of like the events going on, the situation, the environment. It doesn't take into account a lot of things. Now, a weight neutral approach is really focused more so on learning the skills of listening to your body, recognizing what foods make your body feel good and feel energized. And not only that, but also what tastes good and different combinations, and really emphasizing that self-efficacy and self-confidence in making choices that are also in alignment with supporting physical health. And also a really important note to make in the kind of anti-diet community, it's not really like a community, but in that like genre, there is the understanding that if somebody doesn't want to focus on their health, like that is okay. The idea that we have to focus on our weight being something that like you should do, like everybody has their own free will, and it's really not up to me or someone else to kind of say what they should or shouldn't do. Now, I do enjoy putting energy and intention into my health, and I work with a lot of people who want to do that more so. And so when I am talking about health and a non-dieting kind of approach, or weight neutral, food neutral kind of approach, it is not taking into consideration the people who don't want to do anything with their health. Like, that is their own journey, and that's okay. I'm focused on my target audience, right? That's also what this video is focused on. So just know that within there is nothing like inherently morally wrong if you don't want to focus on that. Just as a side note, that weight neutral kind of focused approach is more so learning to listen to your body, doing actions that support your physical health but also don't harm those other aspects of health, mental, social, and emotional well-being that are just as important. And it's really focused on nourishing the body rather than like restriction. So understanding those can really help set the like stage for seeing those nuances of everything in between. Now, with nutrition, there is, you probably don't take a shot every time you hear the word nuance. Take a drink of water every time you hear the word nuance. You might get tired of that word by the end of this video, but nutrition is very nuanced. If I could just like leave something with everybody, it would be that there is not this kind of black or white kind of thing. As much as headlines, articles, nutrition gurus will talk about, like I was even scrolling on TikTok. I have curated my TikTok feed to like show me very, very little. I only follow like 2 or 3 dietitians maybe, but like everything is not nutrition or food or like fitness related. Like I do that in my normal everyday life for work. I don't want to see that on my TikTok feed. But every once in a while, something like nutrition-y will pop in. And as I was scrolling the other day, it was a video with a nutrition coach saying that fruit is bad. I actually reported the video for misinformation and it actually got taken down. I was very, very surprised. And it wasn't just like a catchy like headline, or not headline, but like start of the video and where they further went into like nuance. It was it was fruit is bad. Let me tell you why. And it was full of misinformation. But outside of that, even with nutrition behaviors, it's never this kind of like all or nothing, black or white kind of thing when it comes to nutrition. Like I really want to open up that space to allow for exploration and understanding and just individual choices, just that kind of like nuanced territory as someone can like move in that direction to not having those kind of food rules. I also wanted to make the note that a weight neutral kind of focused approach is not about just kind of throwing your hands up in the air and being like, I'm just gonna eat whatever, whenever. Sometimes people can think that that's what like intuitive eating is, when in actuality there are a set of principles within intuitive eating. And this kind of idea that it's just kind of throwing everything out the window and just eating anything or everything without regard. That is not the case. Intuitive eating really encompasses this kind of mindful, intentional approach. Now, if you don't want to identify yourself as an intuitive eater, that is okay. I think there's a lot of confusion around that term intuitive eating. I've said this before in many videos, but there is sometimes people will put a definition on what they believe intuitive eating is, and that makes perfect sense to do that without recognizing that there are principles. It's an actual like framework, and the principles are very much the opposite of just kind of mindless eating whatever, whenever kind of thing. It's really that dynamic interplay of instinct, emotion, and rational thought. And oftentimes when someone hears a term intuitive eating, they aren't aware that that rational thought piece and that thought piece is part of the framework. Now, it is okay to be in that transformation period. Something as deeply ingrained as our relationship to food and nutrition, it is just like, it's mind-blowing to me sometimes when I see this idea that like, you have to be completely recognizing all of the harms of diet culture and like be in a very weight neutral, kind of food neutral kind of place. It's not realistic for most people when they are moving away, when they have a history, a whole lifetime of traditional dieting. And I think that the transition period in between, there has to be, in my opinion, a lot of compassion and a lot of patience for others and for self. Being in between, moving and being in that transition, that doesn't like signify a lack of commitment to like having an approach that supports your health and is like a more kind kind of approach, right? Like it is, you're just moving on that journey. It is part of the process of growth and self-discovery. And in that transition, there are a lot of moments of confusion, of doubt, especially when someone is used to rules and following rules and having like a set guideline, a set standard of like what to eat and when to eat. That feels safe to a lot of people. I have this like graphic. Several people have made this graphic. I've made it and updated it several times, but this kind of like journey in that transition, it's not this straight line or anything. It's very much like a twisted road. To go through that road, there's a lot of steps. Some people might take larger steps. Sometimes people might take smaller steps. Each small step, each large step adds up. Over time, all of these little steps and these little things that you pick up on the journey really transitions or transforms into that healthy relationship with food and body, and filled with actions that we can do that support our physical health. And for some people, that can take a various or different amount of time, depending on their history and other factors as well. Same kind of thing that we see a lot of times with multi-level marketing. It can take a various amount of time. And remember remember that every person's story is unique and is kind of like woven together. It's like a material that's woven together, and some of the threads include, or the material that's woven together, like includes your upbringing and your experience, your personal beliefs, and all of that kind of comes into play as woven together to build and show your relationship with food. And those threads not only influence how we see food, but also how we see our bodies and some aspects potentially of self-worth, especially if somebody has a very much kind of all or nothing, this is good food, this is bad food, like you're on the diet or you're off the diet. From my experience, I've really seen that can impact how someone sees their self-worth, of how good or how much they're able to stay on that target, or like stay within those choices or stay within those macros and that kind of thing. Some of us might have grown up in an environment where food was really celebrated and it wasn't used as like a tool for control, like either like taken away for certain behavior or provided for certain behavior. Like there is so much woven into the material of one's relationship with food. And your journey is very unique, and it can take like all sorts of paths. And putting this kind of like all or nothing expectation on people of what that journey of transition should look like, that oversimplifies the complexities of people's history and their relationship with food and everything that is woven into those threads. And that can kind of alienate some people if they feel that their experience on that journey isn't aligned with like what the norm is, when there isn't a norm. And I'm not a fan of people putting this kind of like, you have to do this transition a very specific kind of way or feel a very specific kind of way. So embracing that nuance in the transition allows us to really invite the unpacking of unique experiences and really like look beyond the surface for a deeper look at our food stories. And by acknowledging and recognizing our personal food stories, that allows for what I think is just empowerment around how that food story continues to grow. My goal is I want everybody to feel empowered about the food choices that they're making throughout the day. And it can be really confusing or really hard to have that empowerment if you are following like a specific rule book. And so with this food journey, we're really learning to be detectives of ourselves and food anthropologists of ourselves so that we can really understand them, learn from our experiences, and really craft this approach that supports our health moving forward, and in a way that feels like whole health encompassing, that physical, mental, social, and emotional well-being, and authentic. So having some kind of small steps to start that journey or move you along that journey and that transition can be helpful, especially if it feels a little bit overwhelming or a little bit confusing. So let's break down some tangible kind of things that we can do to scoot you along in that journey. So one of the most like fundamental kind of recommendations in this transition is going to be journaling. This doesn't have to be anything like writing 1,000 words or anything. It can be very, very simple. It can even be a sentence or two, but just kind of thinking about different meals, different snacks, like how they left you feeling energized or not energized, satisfied or not satisfied, if they left you feeling maybe bloated. Instead of attributing a meal as like good or bad, assigning it like that label, it's really taking a different step, a different approach to assessing it and really looking at that food and the circumstances around it and how it left you feeling, or patterns, noticing specific patterns with foods. Another small step is to just kind of maybe step away from the scale. So if the scale is impacting how you're feeling about your day, it's impacting your actions, really not a beneficial kind of thing. It doesn't really play a role in seeing our progress if we're already doing other actions that we know are supportive of our health. If we are like focusing on things to maybe we're focusing on incorporating more vegetables at our lunches and our dinners or with snacks, right? We're doing all these things of what to add. As long as you are doing actions that are in support of your physical health, that aren't also harming those other aspects of health, then your body is going to be at a place where it's going to be be comfortable, and you're supporting it health-wise. You're doing what you can to support it health-wise. And we can see the outcomes of that with energy changes, with how we're feeling, like with physical movement and recovery, how our sleep is going, how just our overall consumption of nutrient-dense, nutrient-rich foods is going, how our lab values are going too. There are so many ways to assess and to see progress in our health without focusing on that scale. Another kind of step for a lot of people is finding some kind of joyful movement, some movement that feels good for their bodies. For some people, this can be a lot more challenging than for others, depending on just the like overall environment, what they have access to, where their body is currently at, the various levels of like physical abilities, and also like past experiences. Sometimes people had a really like just traumatic experience growing up in like gym class, or maybe they went to a gym and was not being treated very kindly. There are a lot of different factors that can play a role in how somebody approaches like joyful movement in general, intentional movement. And so finding some kind of movement that is more enjoyable it can sound, it's a lot easier to say than do for many people. I do want to recognize that the goal of that joyful movement is to kind of just explore that, even if it's in small steps of exploring joyful movement itself. It's okay to not feel like extremely excited or extremely joyful about physical activity. There can be a spectrum there, but just kind of approaching that and kind of looking at what that might look like. Another kind of step is just kind of exploring some new recipes, ones that are at a level where you feel comfortable and confident to prepare, and really being able to, we're trying to incorporate more flavors, more textures, more colors, appreciating the process of making that dish or making that snack or meal, and really be focused on the act of nourishing yourself rather than just like eating it just to eat it or because you like should eat it. Another kind of step in many people's kind of journey is the approaching of foods in a more like mindful kind of way. So there's a lot of different ways that can be approached. One way might be to reduce any kind of like distractions while eating a snack or eating a meal. Now, I'm somebody who really does like to sometimes watch a YouTube video while I'm eating because it is like a downtime. It is a time where I can just kind of relax. I think that there is a lot of benefit to removing distractions here and there, especially as you are trying to be a little bit more mindful and intentional with approaching your food and recognizing fullness cues specifically. But it doesn't have to be this kind of all or nothing thing. It doesn't have to be the removal of distractions all the time. If you want to do that for like a snack, for maybe part of the snack, or even a meal for maybe half of the meal, that's also something that can be like part of someone's journey. So there's not this kind of all or nothing removal of distractions either. So that can be a very helpful step in that person's journey on that transition as well. And then another kind of step on the journey is seeking support. Embarking on the journey of that transition, moving away from traditional dieting, can feel very isolating, especially because dieting, it's a community event a lot of times. If you look at like gyms or different groups of people, dieting itself can be this kind of community. And so having a community where you can kind of unpack or be in the presence of other people unpacking that relationship with food can be helpful for some people. Now, this can be helpful for a little bit of guidance or some reassurance, or for celebrations of small wins or big wins, or just kind of like as a sounding board as you are kind of moving in those different steps and gaining those different kind of skills. That kind of support can be really, really beneficial to many individuals. Now, I also wanted to bring up the idea that sometimes on that transition, you might have days where you feel more pulled into a more like traditional dieting approach, and that is not a reflection of you like failing. Again, if we have this kind of history, this long history of traditional dieting, it is like unexpected. It is just like really baffling sometimes for the expectation to be that you don't get pulled in that direction anymore. And if you have that much much of traditional dieting in your history, show yourself some kindness. Sometimes you can be pulled in that direction. And so this is where doing more of that journaling and reflecting on the improvements and the supportive health actions that you have been able to incorporate and do, and recognizing that what traditional dieting did provide on maybe in a positive light for some people, what also the not so helpful things that it also provided for those same people. Things like that restriction and the diet cycling and the weight cycling and just frustration around food and body and all of the negative kind of outcomes that we see so often with traditional dieting. And so on that journey, also recognizing that sometimes going a little bit back is not unheard of, and it doesn't mean that you were a failure, and it doesn't mean that you can't continue to make progress in that transition. I am of the belief that every emotion on that journey and that transition has its place, and it's valid. By treating ourselves with kindness and understanding, we build resilience to continue on that path. Now, on this or in this specific transition, I think so oftentimes I see is that all the small little wins so often go unnoticed. Part of the check-in process that I have with people one-on-one is starting with some positives, starting with wins, what I call them. So like just things that they're proud of doing between our session time. And so many times they'll bring some wins, things that they're proud of. But as we continue on in the conversation, they'll mention other things and I recognize them as wins. And I'm like, there's another win that you were able to do or accomplish. And it's really like cool to see people start to recognize all the small little actions that they're doing that are proof that they're moving through and they're progressing through and doing a really great job at doing those, maybe not as much as a great job of recognizing them and celebrating those wins, which is that's just part of the journey. And so celebrating those wins really helps with the self-awareness kind of factor of that skill within that approach, moving away from traditional dieting. There's a lot of self-awareness in there. And so as we kind of really have that celebration of small wins, I mean, it's great to have to do that to make people like feel better about themselves. That's a huge reason why I want to celebrate small wins. But another like really important reason why we want to celebrate small wins is to build that self-awareness, to be able to recognize those wins, because the self-awareness piece is so important in moving away from traditional dieting and having that approach that supports health. Kind of moving towards the end, I really want to just emphasize or remind you that everyone's journey is unique. It can feel really isolating on the transition from traditional dieting. It can be really confusing. And so having that kind of support can be really helpful. And that's actually something that I'm working on creating and something that I've wanted to do for a very long time. So if you are interested in that side of things, then be sure to follow me on Instagram at Unlocked Nutrition. But I want you to remember that everybody's journey is unique, and it is really important to celebrate all the small little wins, all the steps that you are making, because all of those small skills build into something huge and really awesome. Let's really get comfortable being in the nuance. I think in the nuance is where we really grow, and we can be challenged to grow in how we're seeing that transition and seeing our approaches to nutrition. And just as we want to avoid any like extremes on a lot of things, nutrition is one of those areas. And moving from traditional dieting to non-traditional dieting is important as well. And sometimes I think in the social media world, seeing like nutrition talk be very extreme can feel a little bit scary for some people. All right, so that wraps it up for today's video. Please leave a like if you enjoyed this video. Make sure you're subscribed if you haven't already. I would greatly appreciate that. And remember, you can strive for health without subscribing to diet culture. I'll see you later. Bye.